Hannah and Mark seemed like the perfect couple, living a life everyone envied. But what Hannah discovered hidden behind Mark's calm smile would shatter everything she thought she knew about the man she loved. Hannah always believed her life was ordinary in the best way possible. She had grown up dreaming of stability, of finding someone who would make her feel safe, loved, and grounded. With Mark, she thought she had achieved exactly that. He was the kind of man people respected instantly, polite to neighbors, helpful to strangers, and devoted to his wife. Their friends would often point to them as an example of a couple who had it all figured out. They lived in a neat suburban home with a carefully tended garden out front, the sort of place that radiated peace and comfort. On Sunday mornings, the smell of coffee and pancakes drifted through the windows while Hannah and Mark enjoyed the quiet rhythm of life together. She taught at the local elementary school, adored by her students for her patience and warmth. Mark worked long but steady hours as an accountant, often returning home just as the streetlights flickered on. Their evenings were filled with simple routines, cooking dinner, watching television, and planning small weekend getaways. To everyone who knew them, their life seemed untouched by conflict or hardship. Hannah liked to tell herself that Mark was not only her husband, but also her anchor. He listened when she vented about her day at school. He helped her fix things around the house, and he even remembered small details about her favorite books and meals. He was dependable, the type of man who paid bills on time, remembered birthdays, and never raised his voice in anger. Family gatherings were incomplete without his steady presence, and her parents often remarked that she was lucky to have found such a reliable partner. In photographs, they looked like the embodiment of happiness, two smiling faces side by side, arms around each other, seemingly ready to take on the world together. Behind closed doors, their home reflected that same picture-perfect life. The walls were decorated with framed memories from trips to the beach, hikes in the mountains, and dinners with friends. Their shelves were stacked with novels and board games, hinting at evenings spent curled up in warmth and laughter. Hannah often believed she had escaped the chaos she saw in other marriages. There were no loud arguments, no icy silences, no broken promises. Mark never gave her a reason to question his love or loyalty. He seemed entirely predictable, and in that predictability she found comfort. It was this consistency that lulled Hannah into a sense of security so strong she never considered the possibility of deception. She assumed that happiness was permanent, that the man she loved would always remain the same. The life they built together seemed unshakable, and she trusted him completely. Yet in that trust, she overlooked the small details that might have raised alarms. At the time, nothing seemed worth questioning. Every late night at the office, every odd delivery, every brief flicker of secrecy could be explained away. She never doubted him, never considered that a man so steady and calm could be hiding anything dangerous. What Hannah did not know was that the ordinary life she treasured was nothing more than a mask, and behind that mask, Mark was carefully concealing something far more sinister than she could ever imagine. It started subtly, in ways that were almost invisible at first. Hannah noticed Mark becoming more protective of his personal space, particularly his office. In the past, she had been free to walk in whenever she needed to grab a pen or tidy up, but now the door was almost always locked. When she asked why, he would simply smile and say he had important files he didn't want disturbed. It was logical enough, so she let it go. Still, a small unease lingered in the back of her mind. She reminded herself that couples trusted each other, and snooping into his work would only create unnecessary tension. Packages began arriving at odd hours. Large boxes, plain and unmarked, were delivered to their doorstep. Sometimes Mark would be home to take them straight inside. Other times she would leave them untouched in the hallway until he returned. When she asked what they were, he told her they were office supplies or equipment for a client project. His explanation seemed plausible, yet she couldn't help noticing the way he quickly carried them away, always into his office or the basement. He never opened them in front of her, and the mystery of their contents gnawed at her curiosity. Over time, Mark's behavior shifted in ways that were harder to explain away. He grew quieter, sometimes distracted, as though his thoughts were consumed by something he couldn't share. Dinners that once felt light and easy were now marked by stretches of silence. He often excused himself early, retreating to his office or the basement for hours. When Hannah would go to bed, she often heard faint sounds downstairs long into the night. She told herself he was stressed, that his work was demanding more from him, and that it would pass eventually. But even as she repeated those reassurances, a part of her felt the growing distance between them. The man she once described as predictable became increasingly unpredictable. There were days he would come home late, his shirt wrinkled and his hair disheveled, claiming he had been with clients. Other times, he would vanish for hours on weekends without giving her a clear reason. When she pressed for details, he gave vague answers, dismissing her concerns with a gentle smile or a quick kiss meant to distract her. He never raised his voice, never acted outwardly cruel, but there was a wall forming between them, one she couldn't break through. Hannah tried to convince herself it was only a phase. Stress could explain his secrecy, the mood swings, even the sleepless nights. But as the weeks passed, she noticed more troubling patterns. He began keeping his phone with him at all times, never leaving it unattended. His browsing history was always wiped clean, and his once open nature seemed replaced with guarded caution. There were moments when she caught him staring into space, his expression unreadable, his mind clearly elsewhere. The unease that had once been a whisper in the back of her mind grew louder. She felt it every time she passed the locked office door, every time a package arrived without explanation, every time Mark disappeared into the night. Something wasn't right. And though she didn't yet know what it was, Hannah could no longer shake the feeling that her husband was hiding a part of himself she had never seen. One rainy evening, the tension that had been quietly building for weeks reached a breaking point. Mark had left his office door slightly ajar, something he had never done before. The chance to finally uncover what he was hiding felt almost too tempting to resist. Hannah stepped inside carefully, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The office was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the glow of Mark's computer screen. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, folders arranged with meticulous order, but it was the computer that drew her attention. She hesitated for a moment, knowing that what she might find could change everything. Her fingers trembled slightly as she navigated through the files. What she first saw were simple spreadsheets and invoices. Nothing unusual. But hidden among them were folders labeled with strange coded names. Curiosity overwhelmed caution, and she opened one. The contents made her stomach drop. Inside were photographs of women, taken without their knowledge, often from outside their homes or through car windows. The images were carefully organized, each labeled with dates and times. As she clicked through more folders, a horrifying pattern emerged. Mark had not only been taking these photos, but he had also been tracking the women's routines, when they left for work, where they shopped, and even the routes they took for their daily jogs. It was the level of detail that made Hannah's blood run cold. She discovered lists of addresses, descriptions of habits, and notes on vulnerabilities, all written in Mark's precise handwriting. These were not casual observations. They were plans, meticulously crafted over months and perhaps even years. There were maps with routes highlighted, notes about security cameras, and reminders about which houses had weak locks. The realization hit her with crushing force. Her husband had been preparing for something far more sinister than she could have imagined. He had been watching strangers, recording their movements and plotting in secret, all while maintaining the facade of a loving husband. Hannah's hands shook as she continued searching. There were even files documenting interactions with online communities where Mark had shared his obsessions and collected advice on how to remain undetected. Every click, every folder, confirmed that the man she trusted most in the world was living a double life. The juxtaposition of his gentle, dependable persona at home with the dark intentions he nurtured in private was almost unbearable to comprehend. As she dug deeper, Hannah realized the enormity of the danger. Mark had not only been collecting information, but had been methodically planning potential targets. She saw detailed scenarios, contingency plans, and notes about how to approach certain women without raising suspicion. The magnitude of what she uncovered left her paralyzed with fear. She understood that Mark was not simply curious or eccentric. He was dangerous, calculating, and willing to act on his hidden obsessions. Every file she opened confirmed that her life, her sense of safety, and the very world she had trusted were built on a lie. The man she had loved, laughed with, and shared her life with for years was not who she thought he was, and the truth she had uncovered marked the beginning of a nightmare she could not ignore. Shaken to her core, Hannah realized she needed to understand the full extent of Mark's secret life. She couldn't leave the office without knowing what other horrors might be hidden in the house. Her eyes turned to the basement door, a place Mark had always insisted was off-limits. It was cluttered with old boxes and forgotten furniture, a chaotic space he claimed was simply for storage. But now, with the unease gnawing at her, Hannah knew the answers might be there. She descended the creaking stairs slowly, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. The air was colder here, damp and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and mildew. At the far corner of the basement, partially hidden behind stacks of boxes, she noticed a large locked trunk. The lock was old but sturdy, and the anticipation of what might be inside made her hands tremble. Hannah forced the trunk open, her breath catching as she peered inside. The contents were beyond anything she could have imagined. Carefully arranged were items that suggested an obsession with control and secrecy. Photographs of women, some taken in the most private of moments, were stacked neatly alongside personal belongings like scarves, purses, and shoes. Each item told a story, a violation of privacy that was deliberate and methodical. Tools of surveillance and other objects hinted at intentions far darker than mere fascination. It was a chilling glimpse into a mind that had carefully curated a private world where boundaries were non-existent and obsession ruled. The deeper Hannah searched, the more she uncovered. There were notebooks filled with observations, notes on people she had never met, and lists of names that made her pulse race with fear. Each entry revealed meticulous attention to detail, times, locations, habits, and weaknesses, all cataloged as if preparing for some calculated act. She realized that Mark had been living two lives for years, one as the devoted husband and neighbor, and another as someone methodically mapping the lives of strangers. Every smile he had given her, every act of kindness she had assumed was genuine, now seemed like part of a carefully constructed mask. Hannah's mind raced as she tried to process what she had discovered. The realization that the man she loved had been planning and documenting this hidden life was unbearable. She understood in a terrifying clarity that he could act on these obsessions at any moment. The basement, once a place she had never thought twice about, now felt like a room of horrors, a vault containing the darkest sides of the man she had trusted completely. She began piecing together the timeline, connecting the seemingly minor oddities she had noticed over the past months. The locked office, the late-night absences, the strange deliveries. Each detail now fit into a horrifying puzzle that painted Mark as someone far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Hannah felt an overwhelming mix of betrayal and fear. She had shared her life with a man who had been hiding this secret world beneath the surface of their ordinary life. The warmth of their home, the laughter they had shared, and the trust she had placed in him all felt like illusions. She knew she could no longer ignore the truth. The extent of Mark A.'s actions and intentions revealed a man who had meticulously created a web of control and obsession, a man whose private life was as disturbing as it was calculated. Hannah realized that the life she thought she knew had been a carefully maintained facade, and the danger lurking behind it was far closer than she had ever imagined. Hannah spent hours in the basement, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she had uncovered. Every item in the trunk, every photograph, every note was a piece of a horrifying puzzle that revealed the true nature of the man she had married. Her hands shook as she sifted through the materials, each discovery more chilling than the last. She realized that Mark had not only been observing and documenting others, but had also been creating contingency plans, as if preparing for a life separate from the one he shared with her. The meticulous nature of his planning suggested patience, calculation, and a complete disregard for the lives of those he had targeted. It was not impulsive behavior. It was premeditated, deliberate, and frighteningly organized. As she pieced together the evidence, Hannah began to see patterns she had missed before. Certain photographs were marked with dates, times, and notes about locations. Some entries included observations about security measures, routines, and even social habits. Mark had been collecting data not only on strangers, but also on acquaintances, colleagues, and neighbors. The realization that people she knew were unknowingly being watched added another layer of terror. Every familiar face she had passed on the street suddenly carried a shadow of vulnerability, a reminder of how far Mark had been willing to go in secret. The more Hannah examined, the clearer it became that Mark's obsession was not just a private indulgence, it was escalating. There were sketches, diagrams, and lists that outlined potential scenarios for approaching or confronting the individuals he had studied. Each plan was precise, almost clinical, and suggested that he had imagined executing them in reality. The thought that he might have already acted on any of these plans filled her with dread. The man who had seemed so dependable, kind, and loving was capable of calculated manipulation and violation. His dual existence, a public life of normalcy and a hidden life of control, was a terrifying revelation that left Hannah feeling betrayed, vulnerable, and exposed. Hannah also discovered evidence of Mark's careful attempts to avoid detection. There were encrypted files, hidden passwords, and coded notes that he had created to protect his secret world. He had thought of every precaution, every way to keep her and others from discovering the truth. The sophistication of his methods revealed a mind that was meticulous, intelligent, and chillingly methodical. It was clear that he had been living this hidden life for years, carefully balancing his outward persona with his private obsessions, ensuring that no one, not even his wife, could uncover what he was doing. As the hours passed, Hannah felt a mixture of horror, disbelief, and sorrow. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with was not who she thought he was. Every memory, every shared moment, now carried an undercurrent of deception. She understood that Mark's hidden life was a reflection of his capacity for secrecy, obsession, and control. The revelation of his plans and actions marked the end of the life she had known, and the beginning of a reality where fear, betrayal, and the urgent need for action replaced trust and security. The world she had thought was safe and predictable had been shattered by the man she had married, and the full extent of his secret would haunt her for years to come.